Harry, welcome back to Mea Culpa. I've missed you, my brother. I haven't seen you in a while. Plus, we're going to have to do a Substack soon. But we have so much to talk about.
I actually know how to do Substack now. Go ahead.
Which is hard to believe, right? So, Harry, look, there's a lot to talk about. I want to start with this. I want to start with the Supreme Court's recent decision in the Kilmar-Garcia case. In that case, the DOJ admitted to a clerical error that led to this man's deportation. Yet the court essentially said, tough shit, right? I mean, how the hell does that square with the Constitution's promise of due process?
Yeah. Hey, I'm sorry to contradict you out of the box, but I always like to have some opposition. As I read it, even though you've been listening to Minister of Propaganda Stephen Miller, they backed up Judge Zinnes, as did the Fourth Circuit, and they said, you've got to facilitate Abrego Garcia's return. We can talk about what that means. They told her to be clear about what effectuate is. She just said, forget effectuate. How about facilitate, as in make easier, as in say something instead of nothing, which you continue to do. But she's now ordered up, and we're in the middle of it. 2 weeks of intense discovery, and we're going to see if they talk at all. And if they don't, we've got two cases, Boasberg and her, where they're pushed into a corner and it's contempt time, and they either they precipitate the constitutional crisis, or they do what any administration ever would do, which is actually comply. So we're at sort of high noon here, or 11:57, and I'm kind of glad, because I like the context of these cases. I think they're easy to understand. The human stakes on the other side, especially with Abrego Garcia, are really vivid. And, push has now come to shove. They are either going to take their lumps, or they're going to precipitate a constitutional crisis. I think that's where we are.
I agree with you. In fact, I don't think that we're starting off with a disagreement at all. See, I brought that up in terms of the Supreme Court saying tough luck. I believe that the Supreme Court justices are actually brilliant people. I do. I believe that they really are brilliant. Yeah. Now, I may not agree with them or their policy, but I believe that they certainly understood that when you use the word facilitate versus the lower federal court judge saying effectuate,
she said
think
both.
They knew right. Yeah. I think they knew exactly the route that the Trump team was going to use. I think they were trying to play it in a coy manner so as not to piss off Trump, but at the same time to give enough to we'll call it to the Democrats, right, in order to effectuate the hopeful return of Mr. Garcia. You agree with that?
I do. And look,
I told you we were on the same. I told you, Harry, we were on the same.
Yeah, so I got it wrong. What was I thinking? But look, I just misunderstood what you were saying up front. But I totally agree. And here's the point. The administration has tried to seize on this language. Back to Minister of Propaganda Stephen Miller said, we won 9-0 in the Supreme Court. Total trash. They lost 9-0. But every opinion, including hers, why did she say facilitate and effectuate? Everyone understands if at the end of the day, we're trying our hardest, but the El Salvador president is saying you can declare war and I'm not going to let him out. Okay, now we're in a bona fide foreign policy situation that is the executive's call. But you can't simply say nothing. So what they said about effectuate, the Supreme Court, was just, please clarify. She's always left that teeny bit of room. But here's the point. That's the 10-yard line, and they're on the opposite goal line. They haven't taken step one in that direction, because they're trying to say, as long as we hold up this foreign policy card, we can shut up completely. That is wrong under the law. It's clear foreign policy doesn't mean that the judiciary is out of it. They get to figure out, is this a good foreign policy call? They'll be deferential, but they get to figure it out. So I agree. They've always said, a point could come where you got to back off. She understands that too, but we are miles from that point because the administration is trying to say, and I think they're going to go down, that we don't have to, we don't even have to give name, rank, and serial number. All she's asking them is, what have you tried to do to get him back, as the Supreme Court has affirmed my orders, to facilitate, make it easier? And what do you plan to do? And they're just, Sphinx-like saying, we don't have to tell you that. That's wrong. They do. Right. And that's what these next 2 weeks are going to reveal.
If they just said effectuate, that means get his ass back here, as opposed to facilitate. Well, right. Sure, we'll send a plane if in fact something becomes available. Now you have this guy, President Bukele, saying, I have no power within which to smuggle him back. The whole thing is such nonsense. But the question I really want to ask, no, I can't, Harry. The question I really want to ask you is, why is the right-wing media more dangerous than that? Is Trump's team, right, with Stephen Miller and Carolyn Levitt and others, why are they mischaracterizing this decision as a green light to deport whomever they want, regardless of legal status or due process? I just don't understand what they think that they're going to get out of this. The base that they control, they already own. They own their minds. What's the point? Yeah.
So this is the heavy duty question to me, Michael, and I'm just this as good as I were in the realm of politics, but I've been pretty well persuaded. Trump doesn't, he knows he needs to keep the base intact in order to, that's his magic, secret sauce. I don't think he cares about him anymore. I don't think he cares about even giving them, I think he wants this mad lunatic power to really be able to push any button anywhere in society. And he's past politics in that sense. If he's going to stay in power, it'll just be by seizing the levers of government, a la Putin or Hungary and the like. So I don't think he's trying to give them some red meat. I think he's trying to get his own power down. In the Oval Office, for God's sake, he said, I'd like to do this to Americans also. And he's going to, try to. Yesterday, we now have the IRS saying, let's pull the tax exempt status of Harvard. He's just looking.
We're going to get into all of that, Harry.
Okay. All I'm saying is I long since gave up psychoanalyzing him, but I've been pretty well persuaded by people I respect and I think you respect that, it's a different deal with him now. It's just power lunacy, not trying to, in the last Trump 1.0, he was looking to be reelected. I don't think he is anymore.
No, well, I don't think he thinks there's going to even be another election. I think that he'll just ultimately look to stay in power. But look, as lawyers, for me, and especially as somebody who has gone through the system improperly, and the whole story, the unconstitutional remand, the fact that the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear my Bivens case, I'm always concerned, as I was when I was writing the book Revenge, how Donald Trump weaponized the United States Department of Justice against his critics. What precedent does this set? If a person can be deported after the government admits that it made a mistake, the question I want to ask you is, who's safe? And what message does it send to every immigrant who has actually followed the rules? Like this guy, Garcia, he followed the rules. He came in, I think it was 2012. I like how Trump is trying to blame Biden and the Biden administration for this guy. He was in well before Joe Biden, right? He was in during the Obama administration. He was in during Trump's first term. He was in during the Biden administration, and also for a time period in now Trump's second term before he was improperly removed.
I'm going to take those as what we lawyers call rhetorical questions and say, I agree with you. No one's safe. They could just, a car could stop, get you, put you on a plane, send you to El Salvador and say, oops, sorry, there's nothing to be done. But I want to, as a former DOJ guy, really call out the Attorney General of the United States, the highest federal law enforcement officer we have, because this total trashing, as you pointed out, of Abrego Garcia, totally wrong. This, I think the facts, but double hearsay by a guy who was fired, said he was in New York operating, and he's never lived in New York, and we know all the things he's done, but totally beside the point. He could be the most serious criminal in the world. There's an extant judicial order that says don't send him to El Salvador, and they made a mistake. We know they made a mistake. If you want to prove him to be, the next Pablo Escobar, bring him to court and give him due process, and then send him away. So the Attorney General of the United States standing up, starting with her slavish, praise of maximum leader, giving really faulty facts, and then just ignoring the legal point, which is you've been ordered to, and they want to say something like, well, no harm, no foul. He's bad anyway. That's a lie, but it's beside the point for me as a law nerd, because there is a harm, there is a foul. It's called the Constitution of the United States. And to see the Attorney General, standing for that just nauseates me.
Yeah, well, Trump did the same thing with
but he's
with Bill Barr. It's the same shit. The same shit. But meanwhile, speaking about the courts, let's say the judiciary says stop, right? Which the courts basically have. And the president says, go fuck yourself, right? What are the constitutional consequences when the executive branch flat out refuses, flat out gives them the two-finger salute to follow the court's decision? Are we truly looking at a full-blown constitutional crisis here? Enlighten my listeners with your brilliance on what actually happens here. Because, Harry, here's the thing. I guarantee you, this shit is coming down the street. All
right. Well, look, you don't have to be brilliant to know. This is the phrase that's been bandied about forever, that we've been keeping our eye on. It is a full-on paradigmatic, can I use that legal word, constitutional? It is the very thing. It is the executive has already mowed down Congress, but they've been willing supplicants. This is the court saying, do this. And we're talking stuff from the framers. The whole problem, courts don't have the power to make it happen, but they've always enjoyed the cultural credibility that they declare, and that's the way it is. They declare who wins the presidency in 2000. If that happens, we are we're not a democracy anymore. We really are not a democracy anymore. We are not a rule of law. It's what everyone's worried about. And I do think, you're right. Look, I think they're going to be held in contempt by Boasberg. They're going to be, I think, held in contempt by Zinnis. They're going to say they're going to violate those orders, take it up to the Supreme Court. And I think they're going to lose there. And if they do, and they give them the two-finger salute, we are there. We're no longer at the precipice. The alarms have long since started ringing, but we are literally over the cliff. Where are we if we're over the cliff? We've never been there, except maybe the Civil War. And we are in a place where, it's like a war exercise. Let's see. We've got some state power on our side, but what's the main thing we've got? Popular opposition, with Trump willing to call out the army. We are literally at the possible end and demise of the American experiment, and all rules and all bets are off. And it's, can we take this guy out, however, or not? That's where we are. No more law.
Okay. So let me ask you this. You say, can we take him out? And I want to be very clear. He's metaphorically speaking, not in terms of an assassination attempt. I want to be
because there are people in the administration who would call that an actual threat against the president.
They sure would, and that's not what it was. What we really are talking about here is legal mechanisms. What are the legal
Well,
mechanisms
but also,
within
Michael,
which?
no, it's important. Political mechanisms, because the
Yes.
law at that point would
Yes.
have failed. So,
I was actually getting there because, obviously when I was talking about legal mechanism, I'm talking about short of impeachment. And I see comments coming, whether it's my Substack, my YouTube channel, here on Mea Culpa.
You're everywhere.
Let's impeach him. Let's impeach him. Let me be very clear. That shit ain't happening. All right. And it's certainly not happening for at least another year and a half before the midterm elections. There is not going to be 66% of the Senate within which to impeach. That shit is not happening.
To convict.
So let's not.
And there's not going to be a majority vote in the House. You're totally
correct.
Right.
All right. In fact, MAGA Mike Johnson won't even take articles of impeachment to the House anyway. So here's the thing. What are any mechanisms to compel a rogue president, something that the founders of the Constitution, our founding fathers, always feared, but somehow or another for almost 250 years, we've never been here until we finally met somebody who wanted to turn around to say, you know that incredible document that was written 250 years ago, the one that we all studied, that we all said, it's amazing that a group of men, people, can get together in a hot, sweaty room in Philadelphia with ink stains all over their hands, no computer within which to type and edit and so on and so forth, that these individuals can come up with a document that is ever evolving and as today, well, let's just say as of a year ago, was as relevant and strong as it was when it was first written 250 years ago. Until now, you found somebody who's decided, I'm going to take that document and I'm going to show every lawyer, every person that's ever studied the Constitution, I'm going to show them that that document doesn't mean shit, that I could do whatever I want to it. How do you make a rogue president comply with a court order? Or are we just relying on political norms that Trump has already said, fuck you, I don't agree with, and I'm not going to follow?
Yeah, or political currents. So let's start here. They warned us about this. They said, including in the Federalist, they said, we're doing the best we can. We're putting it up there. We're setting up a real structure of checks and balances. So when you have somebody like that, the Congress will zealously protect its powers, but it's not. The judiciary will zealously protect its powers, but this is always, the most dangerous, well, they thought legislative, but the least dangerous branch, the judiciary. Why? They can make orders, but they can't enforce their orders. And it's even worse. We've been thinking, if a judge says, I want arrest that person, a warrant, that judge can issue a warrant, gives it to whom? A U.S. Marshal, who we've always thought of as part and parcel of the judge's authority. But guess what? They technically work for the executive branch. They technically work for Donald Trump, and he's got a lackey who's the head marshal service who will call that guy up and say, ignore what that judge told you, otherwise you are fired. So what does the Constitution, by its own design, they were fantastic, but they themselves said there's no system on earth that can 100% guard against tyranny, but we've stitched it up as best we can. And as you said, it's worked for 250 years. I would argue even during the Civil War, but that would be the only exception. So that's the answer. And that answer has just been trashed. The answer is the judiciary holds them in check, and the judiciary has the kind of strength and backing of the people, which it may still have. Let me give so on the one hand, legally what's out there, nada. He has absolutely steamrolled the last thing. On the other hand, we're not Hungary. We're not Russia, because we do have a much stronger cultural ballast and, sense of respect for what courts do. And yeah, there are 30%, maybe you'd say 35, who would follow him over the cliff. But that would be the kind of move that I think the real majority, not 51, but 70%, 65, you'll check my math, will say, whoa, this is too much. We don't live in America anymore.
Henry,
that's
that's
the kind of stuff we're talking about, Michael.
But that's between 75 to 90 million Americans that are willing to fall off a cliff, to jump off the fucking bridge simply because Donald Trump is telling them that
Michael, you're the one who told us about this before we even understood it. That is correct.
This episode of Mea Culpa is brought to you by Graza, my new favorite olive oil. It's fresh, it's never blended, and it comes from a single type of olive, the Picual, straight out of Jaén, Spain, where over half of the world's olive oil is produced. So why Graza? Single origin goodness, that's why. Only one olive from one region. No mysterious blends. That means a traceable, a fresher product without mixing in any low grade or unknown oils. It's super fun. It has squeeze and spray bottles too. So there's no more messy tins or drippy spouts. Just aim, squeeze, and go. I mean, there are 3 types for any task that you have. One, they have something called frizzle. That's their newest, with a higher 490-degree Fahrenheit smoke point, which is perfect for frying, crisping, or grilling. Sizzle at 410 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an everyday cooking oil for roasting, marinating, and sauteing. Then they have something called drizzle, which is a bold, a punchy finishing oil that you sprinkle on your salads, you dip your bread in, or even you top it off on your ice cream. Look, let me be clear. My daughter is the actual chef in the house, and she uses olive oil on everything from pastas to preparing steak. I mean, not only does this cook well, it smells delicious. Plus, as a healthy eater, Graza's extra virgin oils, they are loaded with those heart and brain friendly polyphenols. So it's good for you. Look, so here's what you get. You get 10% off your first order on Graza's site. But I personally suggest grabbing the trio. That's all the 3 squeezy bottles, the sizzle, the frizzle, and the drizzle, so that you're set for every style of cooking. So head right now to graza.co and use code Cohen to get 10% off of Trio, which includes, again, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle, and get to cooking your next chef-quality meal. Again, head to Graza, graza.co, and use code Cohen, Cohen, to get 10% off the Trio. And I love saying it, sizzle, frizzle, and drizzle. So get cooking now.
That's on the other side. And you have the person they're following, you know, that's what he's going to say, that's what the insurrection is about. I mean, can you imagine in the streets fighting for democracy with uniformed soldiers on the other side? That's what you read about in third world republics. But that really we would be passed beyond the law. And, you know, at that point, we're in a real sort of no person's land.
Yeah, that's for sure. Meanwhile, we were talking about the whole concept of what's called homegrown. And this is something that Trump has put out there, which is, to me, it's like ethnic cleansing language. And these recent comments about homegrown as being the next group that he's thinking about deporting. I mean, is this full-on eliminationist rhetoric? And what do you think the constitutional protections are at risk here when this kind of, I'm going to call it hate speech, becomes administration policy? Because as somebody that went through it, I'm so fucking mad at the country. I really am. I'm fucking furious. And not only did I yell this from the rooftop, I wrote the book about it. I have gone on every single show. I have basically spoken to every journalist in the world talking about Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein's decision where they unconstitutionally remanded me. Hellerstein, through a habeas petition, had me immediately released, claiming it was retaliatory, and even went so far as to enjoin, imagine this, a federal court judge enjoining the attorney general and everybody in Trump's administration from further impinging upon my constitutional rights. We are now living what I was afraid was going to come back around, using me as the litmus test. I was afraid this was going to happen, and sure as shit, it's happening right now, today.
Yeah, but I mean, what they're contemplating is much worse. So, Michael, we've talked before about including that first really unconstitutional sign here or go to jail on your part. But, you know, the system might have failed you, but you got legal process. He sat there, and this says a lot, even though Trump isn't a lawyer. What does he want to do with these homegrown people, terrible criminals who hit, you know, elderly women on the head? I'd like to send them down to El Salvador. He said, we'll check with Pam about that. Anyway, you don't need a law degree to know. No, the Constitution forbids that. You can take the worst criminal ever. That doesn't mean you can, say, torture them, put them in boiling oil, not give them due process rights. So what he wants to do is establish like a constitutional free zone where you fly them all out and you don't have to worry about it. So it's, you know, complete unconstitutional as the day is long, and no court would countenance it for a second. But if he's in a position where he's just working his will and, you know, coming up on the street and grabbing people and putting them in planes, that just means we're, again, in a constitution free zone. I got this as a pop quiz on CNN, and I think I got it right. There's no such thing. It's quite plainly illegal to take the worst, most heinous of criminals and just say, you don't get, the Constitution applies to everyone, or it applies to no one.
Well, not
if you just can't
right.
understand.
But not if you're an illegal immigrant. You know, the constitutional rights only apply to U.S. citizens. When we're talking homegrown, we're talking about U.S. citizens, right, that he wants to throw out. And to me, the way I see this,
more than throw out. He wants to get out of the Constitution's purview. Judge Timothy Snyder at Yale, really smart guy, made this great point about the, you know, fascism in the 20th century, which is it is so much easier to move people away from the law than to move the law away from people. Make them stateless. All the biggest exterminations of Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, everyone took place in the Second World War outside of it. Was when the Germans went to Poland that it was really all, you know, total final solution time, because you're outside the physical protection of the court. So it is a really, really pernicious idea. I don't think he can do it unless, I don't think any court anywhere, because Mara Cannon, but basically, I don't think any court anywhere would countenance it. On the other hand, if we're in a position where he does what he wants, he puts people on planes. He's already initiated criminal investigations of 2 people who committed the great crime of not agreeing with him last time around. You know, we're talking about true despotism of the sort we associate with, you know, Putin, right? You know, we just kill people on a park bench, and you know, that is literally where we would be.
Yeah, look, I see this as Trump crossing the line from reckless demagoguery into something even more sinister, like, as I said before, signaling some modern day ethnic cleansing under the guise of law and order, because that's what the Supreme Court gave him, the unlimited power of immunity, so long as it has to do with national security. So here, all of a sudden, Harry Litman, the great Harry Litman, is on CNN. And they ask a question, and you give, as you always do, an intelligent and a cogent answer to the question. And it's an answer that our fearless leader doesn't like, because it casts him into a negative light. Next thing you know, the fucking marshals show up to your house. They don't even knock on the door. They kick it down. They turn around, they beg you, tag you, like what they're doing to these students, and we're going to get to them. That next thing you know, you're supposed to be, let's say, in your state, which is California. Let's say, so now you go ahead. You're supposed to be there so that you can have your due process given to you. But instead, they ship your ass out to Louisiana, where they got a judge on the payroll. And next thing you know, you're off in El Salvador with 500 MS-13 gang members, and you're sitting there and you're like, first of all, they cut off all my hair.
What happened to my
Second
hair?
Of all, I don't.
And
right,
I don't
have to worry
I don't
about
like
that
spending
one.
the entire day bent down like this. Oh, by the way, and there's no food. It's a torture chamber. It's not even a prison. It's a gulag.
Yeah, it totally is, and that's my biggest fear.
Yeah.
But it's not only just the judiciary. It's not just only the legislative branch. Trump, for whatever the reason might be, and it's because of the enablers. Like, as much as I blame him as the chief executive, the old slogan that's on every boss's desk, the buck stops here. So yes, he is to blame as the ultimate decider. But these enablers that are around him, the Steve Millers, the Steve Bannons, the Lutnicks, the Pam Bondis, the J.D. Vance, all of them.
The Congress
Marco
of the
Rubio,
United States, right?
The whole group of them. Trump is now openly calling to fire Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, despite the fact that the Fed's that they have legal independence. He believes he can do this, and he said it. He said it on at the time of the meeting with the Italian prime minister that he has the ability, if he wants, to get rid of him. Now, is he?
And he wants. Did you hear his diatribe today about Powell?
I most certainly did. My question to you is, what's the danger here if a future Trump White House simply steamrolls the central bank? Yeah.
Well, first, economic catastrophe, to me, that's almost the least of it, because this will sound hyperbolic, but we're talking about the end of the American experiment. So, but it's an economic cataclysm, and anyone would say that. This is one, however, Michael, that he'll try to go it's in fact right now before the Supreme Court. We've talked about this, and I don't want to put your listeners to sleep, but this has to do, there's a cadre of agencies that we've always kept, at least since the last 100 years or the New Deal, that have some independence, because we care about their expertise and we care about their political insulation. The Fed is the paradigm. So if he can just come in and say, why is he doing this to certain people? Because what's her name, Loomer, comes in and says, I don't like the head of the NSA. He doesn't like you. I mean, we're talking about national security there. It would be the same with the Fed, but he's going to argue that the whole administrative state, or that remaining section of it, that he still needs to have good cause to fire, that very feature is against the constitutional scheme. So it's an argument that's very dangerous, but at least it's a legal argument. I personally fear, I'll go farther. I personally believe that there are probably going to be 5 votes on the Supreme Court to go his way, but then we'll have the terrible consequences that made us create independent agencies in the first place, which is some economic moron like Donald Trump coming in and getting rid of, and some national security moron coming in and getting rid of the people who, anybody with any sense, 98% of the professionals in the country, from very conservative to very liberal, would say, this is basic, and this is the stability and prosperity of the U.S. at stake. And by the way, I mean, he does seem like this crazy mad pilot veering all over the place. And that it's his economic stuff is very unpopular. That's one of the reasons I'm beginning to conclude that he's past politics now. He just wants this general, and you would know even better, what's his paradigm? Just taking everything to him, so people have to come on bended knee, and he can dole out a little of this and a little of that. That seems the basic scheme: maximum ultimate power, and everyone have to come on bended knee. And by the way, just one quick point here is, as Columbia University is showing, coming once ain't enough. Pretty please. Okay, thank you for pleading. Talk to you next week, because that's how it always works with him.
You know what? Let's actually talk about then these universities, the protests,
sure,
and to the anti-Semitism that they're using, because there is right now a full. Oh, by the way, before I go there, I want to just say one thing about Jerome Powell.
Yeah.
Shame on them. You start seeing some of these enablers, these sycophants, like a Kevin McCarthy goes on, of course, Fox News, and he's talking to like Laura Ingraham, and then you have others talking to Sean Hannity, where there's never pushback. Not like we'll have a conversation. We can agree to disagree on facts, but here's the fact. The fact is Kevin McCarthy went to college. I think it was like, I don't know, Cal State or something like that. I forget the college he went to. And he graduated with a Bachelor of Science in marketing. In marketing, right? Which, of course, makes him completely qualified to go against somebody like Jerome Powell, who went to Princeton, got his degree in economics, went on to Georgetown Law School, and then ultimately became one of the partners of the Carlyle Group, which is one of the biggest funds in the planet, right? I mean, like $1 trillion fucking fund who really knows his shit. And then you get your
As every Fed has on both sides, whether Republicans or,
Exactly. Then you get Jerome Powell being mocked by the likes of a Kevin McCarthy. I just find that beyond ironic. But going back to these universities.
I got it. The hour, as you always say, goes quick, but I want to make one quick comment here. I generally have tried today to steer clear of the Hitler analogies, but this is what happened with Hitler. The sort of elite said, we're going to be able to control him. He's a buffoon, but we're going to be able to control him. And they put him in. Reichstag fire happens, and he rolled all of them. And that's the deal. I think people that, there are a lot of Republicans out there with financial sophistication who would say, of course, we don't want to get rid of the head of the Fed. He's got I've got billions of dollars at stake. But it's too damn late because you backed a madman who played you and is now more powerful than you. You sucker. Yep. You blew it for the country. Anyway, go ahead.
Right. All right. So going back to the universities, there right now is a full-blown assault on universities, schools, the Ivy Leagues, right now, with anti-Semitism being cynically weaponized to justify political crackdowns. How dangerous is it when the state starts dictating which protests are legal based upon some sort of an ideological content? This notion of illegal protests, which, by the way, I have no idea how it's even defined. I've never seen a policy. I've never seen a definition for it other than what Trump doesn't like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do have universities try, and this is part of the problem. Both Harvard and Columbia are copping to, we kind of blew it. We should have been a little stronger. But that's the least of it. You're right. That's the pretext. But they're using that to take over the whole friggin' university, to get rid of NIH grants, to try to take away the tax-exempt status of Harvard. If they were really coming in and said, guys, you really kind of blew it a little, and this is a civil rights problem, we want to work with you on how you handle protests going forward. Okay, that's a role if they're really asserting civil rights violations. But the problem here is, as you say, it's being used as a pretext, and this is actually an open area of law. When can you say, take this, what was initially, $2 billion, it's not chump change, and then use it to say, what are they saying in Harvard? We want you to do plagiarism reviews of every single faculty member. That's getting at the Claudine Gay thing. What does that have to do, Michael, with anti-Semitism? And they're nothing. They want to get rid of every DEI program. What does it have to do with anti-Semitism? Nothing. They want to look for ideological balance in every department. So in other words, I think we could quibble with whether or not the little hook they're using is complete pretext itself, or as a transgression of First Amendment rights. But the much bigger thing is they're using it to basically try to put the most important, university. Well, I should take that back. Very big universities in receivership, and that is just huge. This whole part of the Trump administration. Maybe you saw it coming because you knew he had bottomless thirst for power. But the way he has been able to try to influence civil society, big law firms, media, universities, and how half of them anyway have capitulated. That has stunned me. And I think this is going to be, not going to hold up to scrutiny. But that's the real thing. What the hell? Taking this, they say, okay, yeah, we can do better in the anti-Semitic realm, but it's, you cannot take over the entire university, Mr. President.
Well, let me say that the word shouldn't be that he's trying to. Right now, he's accomplishing, doing everything that he said he wants to do. I believe, knowing Trump for the decade and a half that I did, and as close as I was to him, the effort here is to suppress dissent and to control academic freedom.
Yeah.
The way I describe it in my Substack and so on, it's a kind of MAGA McCarthyism.
Yeah.
You agree
I think
with
that's
that?
really right. And just to say, it sounds good, academic freedom. It's much more important than that. Chris Icegruber, president of Princeton, really good article in the Atlantic, just making clear what the partnership between the university and between the government and academically free universities has brought this country.
So let me ask you something. Did you consent to having your phone number, your home address, your children's information, and even your Aunt Linda's maiden name sold to some weirdo in a basement? No. Well, too bad, because data brokers already did it. I mean, these creeps buy and sell your info like it's baseball cards or comic books. And guess what? You are the rookie card. But now, right now, you can fight back with Delete Me. Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to pull your personal data from hundreds of data broker websites. It's like hitting the eject button on the sketchy parts of the internet without having to fake your own death. Look, I've had my name dragged through the mud, slapped across headlines, and used as a punchline in 7 different congressional hearings. So I know what it feels like to have your life on display. So yeah, privacy, it matters to me. And if you think your info isn't out there, well, let me tell you something. You're wrong. It is. So take control of your data and keep your private life private. So here's the move. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting COHEN, that's Cohen, to 64000. That's Cohen, COHEN, to 64000. Again, Cohen to 64000. Message and data rates may apply, but being left alone, priceless.
In terms of really important discoveries that are, everyone, whether they never go to college or not, has benefited from. Here's a little datum I just found out because of this. We lead the world in Nobel Prizes. Hooray for us. Guess what? More than half of the American Nobel Prize winners were born in foreign countries. They came to America because it's the best and brightest where people want to be. Not anymore. It's not going to be that way. If anything, they're worried about, getting hassled at the border. So, I mean, the damage, not just to whether our kids will have fully, room to debate in there, which I think matters, but really the country's prosperity is in many ways on the line in this war against universities.
Look, Harry, as the constitutional law guru that I consider you to be, I want to bring up, of course, the First Amendment. And the First Amendment, which everybody knows, is designed to protect even speech that we find abhorrent. I 100% I am with Israel on this. I believe that what Hamas did is disgraceful. If every fucking member of Hamas fell off the planet, I wouldn't shed a tear. But I do shed tears for the innocent Palestinians. I have many friends who are Palestinian. So I'm conflicted here, very much so. So some of the comments that were being made by some of these protesters, I find abhorrent. However, I also...
And you can't physically jostle and keep people from going to class,
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
I find all of that to be abhorrent. However, my bigger fear is the violation of the First Amendment. As somebody
Yeah.
who had their First Amendment constitutional rights violated, I was the first here. If Trump criminalizes student protests under this guise of stopping hate, under the guise of anti-Semitism, my biggest fear, knowing this group of animals that are there, where does it stop? And ultimately, who decides what qualifies as hate speech? That's my biggest fear. And look, I'm not opposed to some of the parts of what Trump is saying in terms of I can't call it policy, just this concept of a policy. Partially right message, but definitively wrong messenger. That's the problem here. You cannot shred the Constitution. You cannot just rip out page 1, right, and get rid of the First Amendment, because nobody knows what you think qualifies as hate on a Monday. By Monday afternoon, it could not qualify for hate. Tuesday will be different than Monday. Thursday will be different than Wednesday. And we're all confused. And it's all based upon your knee-jerk reaction. That is not the actions of a president. That is the actions of a supreme leader, a monarch, a dictator, a king, a ruler, that's who it is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right point. And, look, you're right. In some ways, on a policy level, it's a little complicated. I saw some of these demonstrations and they, frightened or concerned me. But the bottom line, let me give you a good example. It looks like, I'm not sure, but Eugene Volokh, who knows this stuff, says there seems to be a First Amendment right to wear these masks. Now, these masks are frightening to me, and I understand why they're frightening to students. But the administration is coming in and wanting to have a no mask rule. I, like you, I wouldn't shed a tear at a no mask rule. I think it would really change the conduct of some of the people if it were known who they were. But the bottom line is, what's the Constitution say? And if the Constitution says they got a right to wear the mask, even whatever I feel about the bottom line policy, just as you're saying, Michael, it's a Constitution we're expounding. So I don't care if the maximum leader stumbles into the right answer that if I were maximum leader, I would impose. That's why we have a Constitution, to constrain all our leaders. Right. And if that's the way it ends up, and that makes it a little bit harder because that's the hurly-burly of the First Amendment. Okay, it's rules. As you say, we all know what they basically bring. We basically think they are just, and we've all agreed to be bound by them as a matter of norms and culture. That's the society, democracy, I want to live in, not one where the maximum leader decides, even if occasionally stumbling into answers that I don't object to.
Agree totally with you. Harry, final question for you.
Yeah.
As I said, the hour goes by so quickly here. What keeps you up at night right now? And what's the one threat to our democracy that the media is just not talking about enough? They're petrified. I blame partially the media on all of this because they're fucking silent. Not independent media like Midas Touch and others. No, I'm talking about mainstream, lamestream, cable news media. They're afraid. They're afraid that Trump will pull their FCC license, that he'll go after them like he did ABC. I mean, but what's the part that the media's not talking about that we damn well should be?
Yeah. I think look, I am a lawyer, and the thing that they are talking about is what keeps me up at night, because it now seems, a couple things. First, people don't seem to fully account for the secondary effects of all the things he's doing. So he fires one a career AUSA who's investigating a friend of his. To me, that means every AUSA, and I know it, is like nervous and worried. Can they even appoint can go after any Republican? He does this for one law firm. So it's one. The thing that I think there people are not fully grasping is, and this is how, we see this from other countries. This is how tyrants work. It just takes, Putin, he needs what? 12 Navalny's to make 12 million Russians afraid. So there's that.
Exactly.
But there is, the ruthlessness. So look, I am very afraid of what the media is talking about, which is we're about to cross this terrible place where, to my mind, even though it doesn't seem to be, resonating as much as the price of eggs, it's everything. It's our, democracy, but also he's a really ruthless dude. And so if he's permitted to do it, there's going to be instances of complete. Let's just take Abrego Garcia, guy who's, got an order. Don't take me to El Salvador. His life is potentially over, right? If they don't, so I mean, the real prospect, we joked about my being taken away if I say something wrong on CNN, but I wouldn't say this of you. I would say of me, I'm like in the 8th circle, maybe you're in the maybe 2nd, but the actual use of government power to just, not to make jobs a little bit harder which would be unconstitutional, but to just annihilate enemies. He is bottomless in his thirst for vengeance, which again, I don't try not to psychoanalyze him. It obviously comes from some kind of deep insecurity, but it's just never enough for him. He obviously fantasizes about anyone who said anything bad about him just being, drawn and quartered. And besides lawless, he is so vicious and ruthless. So, like any parent, what keeps me it's, wow, my children might not live in a democracy. That's enough. Old as I am, my sleep's already a little tenuous. With that, a little extra push, that keeps me up at night.
Well, Harry, thank you, my brother. Appreciate you. I feel smarter after speaking to you, as does my listeners.
Thank you. So, and I'll just say
we're
one
going
thing.
to do a Substack. We'll do a Substack together.
You and I are trying, as our few, Midas and Bulwark, to establish a different, avenue that people can go to. And I think we're both in there slugging, trying to give it straight in the Substack world and the YouTube world. So keep it going, and I hope people will
Harry,
check us out as well at Talking
Appreciate you every day. Thank you, my brother.
See you later.
You got it, pal.